should be recording now.
All right. Wonderful. All right. So I'm going to start by probably sharing my screen and oh good. It's not. I was worried it was going to tell me I needed permission for that, but it looks like it's going to let me record. Okay. I only have one screen, so you can probably see everything else too. Can you see my screen okay, everybody?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So spiritual thought tonight, I don't know, I kind of picked we're in organizing ourselves mode, but we're also and I kind of used that scripture earlier today on my other post, but um yeah, let me just read this one. And as all have not faith, seek ye diligently and teach one another words of wisdom. Yea, seek ye out of the best books words of wisdom, seek learning even by study and also by faith. Um, I think that's a great scripture for the way we are learning here in online BYU, Idaho. Um, we're teaching one another. Brother Jones, do a little bit of the teaching, but more of the teaching is each of you learning and then sort of learning individually, learning as teams, and teaching each other how to do things. And seeking the best books, words of wisdom. You have a lot of resources out there, and I'm one to say that when you are heavy into programming in a few weeks, uh, you can reach out to other resources when if you can't find answers in the documents that are provided. You can go to YouTube, you can go to Google, you can search wherever. We have a teacher's aid. I didn't see if Mark is logged in tonight, but our teacher's aide, I asked him this week if he was getting much people asking about what he was doing and or if he could help them. And I don't think you guys have reached out to him a lot. I'm seeing the course starting to reach out to me, and I'm happy for you students to reach out to me. But as things get progressed throughout the semester, I think Mark's going to be a good resource when I'm not available or I'm helping somebody else. And like I say, this is not my full-time job. This is a night job for me. And so my real hours are kind of Wednesday through Friday nights for a couple hours each evening. And then occasionally other times, but mostly that's my hours that I'm available. So, any thoughts? Any experiences from other online classes about teaching one another?
I have a thought. In a lot of my online classes that I've done where we've had like discussion groups, they've always been super annoying because it felt like you were required to post and you had to have like a minimum number of words or whatever. And so people were just doing the bare minimum and not really actually contributing to the discussion. But in my programming classes so far, I've thought they've been pretty awesome because it's just been more peer review where everybody's kind of in the same boat looking for help with everything, and sometimes you're able to give and sometimes you need more help and everything else like that. So I've only a couple semesters in, but so far I've had really great experiences in my programming classes as compared to my other ones.
Great comment. That was good. Yeah, as we are organizing our teams, if you can't make your team work, I'm saying it, I'm shooting straight. If you can't make your team work, you're going to do poorly in this class. It requires good teamwork. And so as you pick your teams this week, you really do need to pick somebody that you're compatible with, not only personality wise, but time and level of effort and all of that, because it really requires good teamwork. And when you um, go into the workforce, and many of you already are, but most of the time as software engineers, we work as teams. And I do, where I work, we have a core team that writes all the new products. Actually, it's one product, but writes the new versions of it and new features and things. And then there's a maintenance team and I'm on the maintenance team right now. And when we have customers that call in and report problems, and our tech support team realizes it's a bug in the software, we, the maintenance team, goes through and searches through the software and figures out what's going on and fixes the bug. And we really have to lean on the core team a lot of times too. If we go in and we say, why is it coded this way? Because this is what's happening, and I don't think that's a good behavior. And we have to work together as teams, and sometimes be willing to take time away from I as a maintenance engineer, I feel bad sometimes when I go over to one of the core engineers and say, I need your help for a few minutes to look at this and tell me, why is it, uh, why is this the behavior? Because it looks like it's coded correctly, but it's not, doesn't seem like the intended behavior. And so we have to work well together with each other. So anyway, enough of that. So last week you had larger teams. You had teams of 6 or even more, a few of you. And I saw that those teams, in general, worked pretty well. There were a few teams where one, two, three people just didn't seem to contribute a lot, and their grades mostly reflected that they didn't contribute much when I graded the assignment. Um, and I don't know. There's still two or three people in the course that are just not doing anything right now, and so I assume they will be dropping the class, but I don't know. Um, but they're not. I mean, they're not going down the right road if they're not going to be working with their teams. So as you break down your teams, and most of the time, and I'm already hearing it a little bit, the teams that you were in, you've already formed some relationships a little bit. You've already seen the personalities and time schedules and what works and what doesn't. And most of you are or probably will be picking your partners, um, or your smaller teams out of the larger teams. And that's natural and perfectly fine. Um, so any questions about the teams? The teams should be teams of 2 or 3 people. I mentioned last week that we would try to do teams of 3, but the fact that we're going to a single game for the whole class, that we're all going to work off pretty much the same requirements document, tells me that if you end up, if you're if you are in on a team of 2 and your partner drops the class, we can scramble around and put you on another team, and you won't be starting fresh on some other game that you're not familiar with. You'll be familiar with it and should be able to get rolling with a different team if you need to. So I'm okay with teams of 2 or 3. And I think we need to kind of keep it to that, not more than 3 people on a team. So are there questions from last week's assignment? I know not everybody probably was happy with their grade. I had a couple of groups that had pretty good grades, and a few groups that kind of had B type grades, and but it was a lot of work, and I grade by the rubric, and I have to kind of look at what you've accomplished and what what's not in there that the rubric is asking for. So does anyone have any questions for this group about last week's assignment? Okay, I'm hearing crickets, so I'm assuming no. All right, so this week there are two games that I picked out, and we're gonna kind of go with one of them. But let me pull up the two games, and if you're on the team for either one of these games, and this had some icons in it, but when I pulled it down, downloaded it, the icons disappeared, unfortunately. But one of them is Island, and the other one is Pioneer Trail. Is anyone here from either of the teams that did these?
I was in the Pioneer Trail.
Me
Okay.
too, in the Pioneer Trail.
All right. Anyone from Survival Island? The differences between these two, they both were fairly well written. They both had, I'm going to go down here. This has a map. This has every location listed on the map. I think this one didn't have. Yeah, it has kind of description of each site. It didn't have a clear how do you win the game, how do you end the game, lose or win or lose the game. And the two of you that just spoke up, are you Pioneer Trail?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Rather than me describe it, because I went through a bunch of games last night, and can one of you just take the microphone for a minute and just tell us a little bit about what this game's about?
Cynthia, would you like to start?
The Pioneer Trail looks, it will be like a Pioneer Trail, that what they're looking for survival. And I don't know what else to say. Help me here. So, yeah, the people, like, when you are playing the game, you needed to have your supplies, you need to have the map where you're going to, and there are some, I'll say, difficulties along the way, and you need to be able to get into the promised land. Is there anything else that the brother Craig is waiting for me to say about the game?
The game is, we tried to get it to as close as we could of the Oregon Trail game.
Mm-hmm.
So we did a similar idea with the Pioneer, where you need to travel to your destination, Zion. You will have a lot of difficulties, a lot of problems during the way. You need to be prepared. You need to have resources. You will have to visit places. If you could hunt. You could look for food, for other resources like wood, maybe water. You could get sick. It's just we try to modify the Oregon Trail to put it into a pioneer adventure. That was the main idea.
Okay, and so the ways you could lose the game is get ill and die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I know to win the game is if you get all the way to Zion, or I suppose that means
Yeah.
Salt Lake,
Yeah.
or then you win the game.
Yeah, that's correct.
So let me ask it again: is anyone from this game, Survival Island? Anybody here that would be willing to share about Survival Island? Okay. I think Pioneer Trail is what we're going to do. So
Awesome.
I will post the requirements document. And I realize that Pioneer Trail isn't 100%. None of them were 100%, you know, and I think it's pretty well understood that when we do requirements documents, as you get further along when you're writing a program or a game, you realize holes that are in it. And so we're going to find that out through the semester. We can talk about them at our class meetings or in our groups. Do you have, yeah, there's the formulas. Do you have lists of resources? Hunt for resource. Yeah, you've got some resources listed. So that looks like a left foot. Maybe not. Sorry, my wife is messing around right now. Okay. So yeah, I think the best thing to do is for me to publish this, and I'll post it after the meeting. I'll post it probably in the discussion group if I can. Or I may have to just put it in as a document in our assignment, in our chapter. I'm getting all tongue twisted because my wife's changing my shoes for me. She's trying on some other shoes. Well, is this my dad's old slippers? No. Oh, okay.
Brother
All
Joe,
right.
I have a question.
Yes.
So is it okay if in our groups, if we take the basic outline of this, but kind of change it up a little bit to have some of our own creative touch?
Yes, I will allow that. So you can put your personality in it a little bit. I try to keep the same basic framework, but of course there'll be places where, you know, there'll be questions asked, and when you go to a location, there's things that aren't clearly described at the location, and you can put your personality in it and make it fun, make it, you know, you can make funny things that happen, whatever. But yes, you have that latitude to do that.
Awesome. Thank you.
So, okay. Any other questions about the game? The decision has been made. I realize everybody worked really hard last week, and it's hard for me to say, you know, there were 5 groups, I think 5 groups, and only one of you get your game. And this game was more traditional, closer to the Oregon Trail that we had talked about, but that is not why I chose it. I chose it because it was the most complete set of requirements. It had most everything that we had asked for. And so that's why it's the game that I chose. And the other one was very similar in what was in it. It was a different theme, kind of, but anyway. All right. So we've now revealed the game. So this week, let's talk about the assignment, because there's always confusion about this week's assignment. Has anybody played with Visual Paradigm at all?
I haven't yet.
I have.
Yep, I did.
I have.
I downloaded it. I don't know how to use it.
Okay, is there anyone that's used it enough that would be willing to kind of just show us what you learned? and share your screen, and I'll unshare my screen?
I used it because I took this class once before, so I used it quite a bit then. For creating the UML, but
Okay,
I'm not
is
sure
this
how much
Cameron?
I remember. Yeah, it is.
Okay, I'm going to stop my share, and I want Cameron to share his screen.
Okay, let me see if I can remember how to do that.
Is that going to mess up the recording?
No,
It should
shouldn't.
not. Right now, all we see is green. I don't know about anyone else, but
Trying to remember how to share my screen. Oh, there it is. Big green button.
yep.
Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep, I can.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me get this loaded up here.
So while he's loading it, let me just talk to you about what data you're going to try and capture in Visual Paradigm. This week, you're capturing the data objects. So you're not capturing the menu. I want to make it really clear. We're not capturing the UI. We're not capturing the formulas that you had to do. You had to come up with 3 or 4 formulas. All we're capturing is each piece of information that represents data that has properties set on it. For example, player. Okay, when you log into the game, you are going to create a player object, and the player has properties. What's the first thing you're going to ask the person logging in?
Name.
Their name. So guess what one of the properties are for the player class or attributes? I say go ahead.
Name, age, sex.
Okay.
I think these would be public attributes, but I don't know.
Right. Yeah, they do need to be public attributes because you're going to have other objects interacting with this throughout the whole game.
Okay.
And the player, there's different places where you can keep the score, but the score could be kept on the player, you know. And the health, level of health, which we don't really know what that is, but you need a property that keeps track of, you know, their health. And what else?
How about if they're deceased?
Um,
If they die, the game's over. Does it have to?
Right. That's
know
a good.
died?
Yeah, you could go either way with that one because, you know, when the game's over, the game's over. But on the other hand, if you identify that they're deceased, when you leave whatever object you're in and it returns to the previous menu, that menu could check to see if the player's deceased, and if they're deceased, it just keeps saying, "Oh, okay, go back to the previous menu," and so on all the way back. So, so that's reasonable. But you could also say if the health is 0, they're deceased also.
That's
So-
what I was thinking.
Okay. Anything else? So this
I
is
think that Pioneer Trail sort of thing, maybe thirst and hunger.
okay.
Fatigue.
Okay. So I was going to mention that I sometimes call these properties. If you're working in C#, we call them properties. If you're working in Java, we call them attributes. They basically mean the same thing. Okay? And you're looking at a function there now, aren't you? Or
Yeah.
a method. So we can stop with that one right now for a moment. And let's create another class for a minute.
Is everyone able to see what I'm doing?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
thanks, Cameron.
Okay, let's go to the class, and we're going to call it, in the instructions, it'll talk about um, characters. I like the term actor better than characters because character is a reserved word. I don't like that. That, you know, a char is a single letter. So an actor, um, an actor could have a name. An actor is something we interact with that could be a person, could be an animal. Um, so it could have a name. Um, yeah, could have gender. Could have uh, what would be a good Boolean, which would be true or false, whether they are evil or not. You may have an actor that's
Am I missing something? What's the difference between a player and an actor?
the player is the person that logs in. This is a single player game.
Oh, okay.
So the actor are other they seem like players, but we interact with them, but they are part of the game. We are in control of the game, kind of. We're the ones that are playing the game. So the player is you when you log in and start playing the game. And I just want to say, we're just tossing some ideas out here. You have to look at your game, kind of the game requirements, and decide what properties you need. You really don't want to overdo too many properties, because if you do way too many properties, you're just constantly going to be filling in properties in your code that may not be necessary. So make sure when you really are doing this as teams that you think through what properties do we need, and when you put properties down there, look at them and say, is this really necessary or not, and so forth. Okay. There is a sample in your reading. It shows some sample code that shows a character class, which I'm saying to use. I suggest you use actor class. It has player. It'll have location. It'll have scene. Typically, location is more like XY coordinates, sort of, on your map. And the scene is where you would put, this is Nauvoo. That's the scene. So it's the actual place. And in the scene, you might have a question that they're going to be asked when they get to that scene. The UI can look at the property of that scene and say, okay, this is scene Nauvoo. It has a question, so we'll ask the question based on those attributes. And that's another possibility, a question class. Let's do a question class for a minute. So this one's maybe, so these classes, when it's a class, it means it represents what the data is stored like for one or many of these objects. The class is the definition. The object is when you actually create one of these. So the object is, all right, let's say the class is actor. The object is a bear, you know, and so the object would have the name, maybe bear, type might be animal, whatever. So you may have 10 actors. They're all instances of the actor class, but they each have their own properties set depending on what they are. So the question class, let's think about this. So the first thing might be just question text. Okay. And then you may have answer one. Let's say it's multiple choice. So let's put answer one, answer two, do like 4 answers. Okay. And then put correct answer. All right. So the correct answer might be an integer. And so when you fill in the properties, the question might say, what is your instructor's name? And then answer 1 might be Amy Jorgensen. Answer 2 might be Ariel George. Answer 3 might be Craig Jones. And answer 4 might be Tyler Harmon. And then correct answer, what would that be?
Craig Jones.
Well, it would be answer 3. So it would be 3. It would be an integer just saying the third one. So that when you actually are writing code, which we're kind of trying to make some leaps here, but I want you to think about what you're building this week, because what you're building this week is the framework for your game. You're building what the objects are, or the classes are that are going to be in your game, so that you can actually build your game in a way that you can customize a lot of stuff. So the type, and is there a way to describe what the data type is in this?
I think you just do something like that.
Okay. All right. And actually that one would not be string. That would be probably integer. That last one.
I broke it.
So that one I would put just integer or int. Yeah.
Okay.
And then the ones above, all the ones above would be strings. Okay. So can you see that this class, this question class, is just a framework that you could have like 4 cards like this that represents 4 different questions, and you just fill in the data for each one of them so that each one of those cards, but you don't display it that way in here. You just say we're going to have a question class, so that anytime we need a question, we'll create an instance of the question class and we'll fill in all of the properties or all of the attributes with the question that I want this object to contain.
So, quick question.
Yeah.
These classes are basically like a template for the objects that we're actually creating for the game,
That
right?
that is correct.
And then these are basically just variables that we can put in
Right.
for those. Okay, just making sure I understand.
Yep. So if you have 3 questions in the game, you only show one question class here, but in the game when you're writing the code, you would create 3 different instances of the question class, one for each of the questions, and all the answers and all the data there, so that anytime you need to ask that question, you just put that, you can pull that up and you can write something that really doesn't know anything about the particular question. It just knows the logic is, here's the question. I can display the question and I can say, here's the 4 possible answers, and put a 1, 2, 3, 4 next to each one of them and say which answer is correct. And they put in If they answer 2, you say, oh, that is it equal to correct answer? Nope. Okay, that's wrong. You gave the wrong answer. So that's one way to do a question class. You can also, you can do one, with the formulas, you may have some other question classes, and I'm not, we're just kind of giving you a feel for this. So let's do one more class here and call it a scene, because that's another class you're going to do. And so here you may want, what do you want for a scene?
Probably location.
No, because scene will actually be contained in a location.
Or like the location name,
Um,
maybe.
The scene name.
Yeah.
So just a name. Just name would be the property.
Okay.
And it'll be a string. And you might have a description here. So when they move to that scene, move to the location that contains this scene, you can display the name of the scene. You can display the description of it. We also use scene symbol. So call it symbol, which is like a 2-character. So if it's Nauvoo, you might have NA. So that when you're looking at the map, it might have an NA there, which represents Nauvoo, and that would be your scene symbol.
That would also be string, right?
Yes. And then what else? At a scene, what's going to be there? Besides having all those names and stuff. So a scene might contain an actor, right? But rather than containing an actor, that's more of an association. So the scene class could be associated to actor or contain an actor. So this is where we get into relationships. So I saw you pull up the relationship. Yeah. And I'm not going to go in and teach you all the stuff about relationships right now because it's all in your reading. But I just want him to put a relationship symbol between them, kind of show how you do that. Okay. So, yeah, and you can describe these. They have the arrows on the ends have meaning. There's one to many sometimes. So you could say a scene might have many actors. A scene could have a question also. So as you build, this week's assignment's going to be looking at all the data that's described in your game that is data. That's like not user interface. It's just kind of data that's, it'll hold information about the game. And that's what you're building. It's really the data layer is what we call it. It's kind of like your database in a sense.
So I have a question.
Okay.
With these attributes where they have private or public, we read about that in the readings,
Right.
but where I don't have very much experience with programming, when would we know that would need to be public and when would it need to be private?
It's a good question. So if a scene contains an actor, what does the scene need to know about the actor? Does it need to know its name? Or its type? Or its gender?
Yes.
Yeah. So anything that, if it needs to know it, it needs to be public. If it needs to be available to other objects that have relationships with them.
Okay, so if another table needs to access that, then it would be public? Is that right?
And you said the term table. That is kind of looking at it from a database perspective, and I mentioned database earlier, but it's really another class or object.
Yeah, that's the other class I'm taking right now. So
Yeah,
databases.
right. So it's going to be a little bit of mapping things different ways. But yeah, but yes, if another class or another object needs to know information about a different object, then you need to make sure it's public within each object to understand that so that it can see it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. I think you did a great job, Cameron. Everybody give him an applause. Thank you. And now can you stop sharing your screen?
Yep.
And I'm going to, why do I have exit full screen. Okay. All right. So this week's assignment, we've had our demo on visual paradigm. We've kind of talked about this week you're modeling the data objects. Not the menus, not your formulas, just the data objects. And so when you think about it, does this object have to do with the user interface? Menus are user interface, and that's mostly what your user interface is. Then if it's a user interface thing, you're not modeling it this week. You're just modeling the data that things that happen in the game that you need to keep track of. So any questions?
So does that mean that we don't need to create a class for like the inventory or resource lists or anything like that? Or do we still want an object for that, just not plan out how the menu is going to look?
That's a good question. Each item that's in a list, if the item has multiple attributes, then yes, you need to describe the item. You need to create a class for the item so you can store all the information about it. If it's just a single value, like a name or just a string or an integer, then no, because those lists, we're going to create a container that keeps track of all of them. We're going to create containers like lists or arrays. And so if they're just strings, it would just be an array of strings, a list of strings. But if it's got multiple properties, like, I don't know, in your list, let's look at what the lists are down here in this. Got the map. So supplies. So some of the supplies might be the name of the item and how much it weighs or how much space it takes. So you just have to kind of look at what the data is that are in the lists and see. But if it has multiple properties for each item, then yes, you will need to create a class for them. If it's just deal with sickness, what's the sickness? Fever, hyperthermia, snake bite, broken bone. If that's it, you probably don't need a class for it. But if fever means what's your chances of death, maybe there's a percent chance of death for each one of those four things, then you would need a class that has illness, and you'd call it, you might say illness type and percent chance of death or something like that, so that if you get bit by a snake, you need to know what your chances are and you figure it out. You could add logic to say times the chance of death to see if I still have any energy left.
Okay.
All right. Anything else?
Yeah, it's a quick question. So on these classes, we're only going to use the attributes and not the operations, correct? For this week.
Well, you're saying the attributes, not the operations. What do you mean by operations? Do you mean functions, methods?
Correct. Yeah. Do we need to list the function that we would be using for that class, or do you just want the attributes for that class?
I think in general, it's going to be a class name and a bunch of attributes for each of them. I can't think of anything, and I may see some examples later, and I'll try to post them in the forums if there's reasons why you would want to put other stuff. But the data is the attributes, and that's what we're trying to capture this week, is all the data that the game's going to keep track of.
Okay.
All right. I think we will call it a day, and who was recording this?
One more question. Real quick. Where is this going to get posted under? Is it going to be under announcements, or is it going to be in the developers forum?
The game?
Yes, the game.
The game. I will make an announcement and tell you where it is, because I'm not sure where I can add an attachment. I think I've got to put it under somewhere just in the course outline. I just have to attach it to it. So I'll attach it somewhere. If I can attach it to an announcement, that may be all I need. But I've got to figure out where I can do it. But wherever it is, I'll make an announcement that tells where to find it. And I'll do that as soon as we get done with this meeting. And whoever was recording, just make sure you send me an email with the link to the recording.
Okay, I'll probably just upload it to YouTube and then send you a link to YouTube.
That's perfect. Yep,
okay.
That'll work. Okay. I thank you all. It's we're starting to get into the meat of the semester. Not coding. We're not writing any Java this week. I don't think there's any of that, but you're learning Java a little bit more because you're building your classes. You're building a visual display of your classes that you can then write code next week with. And next week we'll start moving these classes into actual Java code. So, all right. Thank you very much for attending, and get your teams put together, and I will check online tomorrow and see how we're doing.
All right. Thanks, Brother Jones.
Thanks,
All right.
Brother Jones.
Thank you, Brother Jones.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Brother Jones? I was
Yes.
wondering if I could ask you some questions about, well, it's a personal question, actually.
Well, if you need to keep it a little personal, why don't you come in through Hangouts and catch me there, and then we can have a one-on-one discussion.
Okay, you're available right now?
I am, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, bye.